And the move to Switzerland from Australia came at a really crucial moment in my life because I was exiting from a very toxic relationship and went through a long legal process to get sole custody of my son and permission to move to this country. And that was motivated by freedom, motivated by love. And it left me happy in one aspect of my life, but stuck in another. And that other was professionally. So when I moved over to Switzerland, I had this moment where I was not sure which direction to take and seeking answers. Now, I had been invited to a job interview in Geneva, and I live in this gorgeous place where I overlook the Alps, the snow capped Alps at this very moment, a gorgeous lake. And there is about a 1 hour train journey over west to get to Geneva. And I'd been invited to this job interview, and quite honestly, I was not invested in it. I somehow knew that it wasn't the right thing for me. And yet I thought, I'll go anyway. I'll see what happens. But there was a moment on this train that I will never forget. And it marked a change in direction, which has set me into something where everything is just working. I'm alive, I'm in joy, I'm getting results for myself and other people. And it happened through a moment of difficulty. So I was on this train on the way to this job interview, and I was reading a book, very unrelated, actually. It was on how to harness your intuition. And I was sitting there and I turned a page, and there at the top were these seemingly unrelated words of helping people to overcome the fear of public speaking. And as I read those words on that very page, I thought to myself, huh, that's something I could probably help people with. And I kid you not, at that exact moment, the train pulled into a stop. I was on a double decker, I was sitting on the second floor, and a man walked up to the second floor waiting to take his seat in a line of people. And emblazoned on his t shirt were the words which read, "Use your instincts." Oh my goodness, Heather. This was the moment where I had huge chills run up my arms and this sense of this rush of energy and of joy. And I started furiously writing in my journal, thinking, there's something in this, there's something in this. I decided to show up to the job interview anyway, knowing that it wasn't quite the right thing, but feeling so happy and alive. And to cut what is a long story short, with this very crucial moment, I have now created a company which is dedicated to storytelling and speaking and helping other people to find and use their voice more effectively.
Shannon, thank you. I When you were telling your story, I was thinking about the purpose of that job interview. Like that's exactly where my mind went, which was when we trust the journey, we can see or hear the whispers. And I'm curious your relationship with that, maybe before that moment, and how you utilize trusting your instincts um, in your journey to where you are today.
Listening to those whispers, getting quiet enough to hear them, was not a part of who I used to be. I used to live in London and in Paris, which was a very busy, hectic lifestyle. And now me knows that I was living in perpetual survival mode. And it took a very challenging personal relationship to wake me up to that. I mentioned a little bit earlier that I had this legal case in this relationship that I exited. I didn't have the vocabulary to describe it at that time. Now I know it to be I was with somebody who had narcissistic personality disorder. And that was fortunately recognized by the courts and led me to this freedom that I have now. And by freedom, I don't only mean this permission as such from the judge to relocate across the other side of the world with my son, but also a sense of inner freedom. And that was not the place that I was living in before. And a crucial part of that was actually listening to these whispers, to the intuition that we so often ignore particularly when we don't trust ourselves. And I realized that was symptomatic of how I was living. I absolutely did not trust myself. I was constantly seeking answers outside from others, from that external validation or input, without having that deep anchoring and sense of knowing in myself who I am and what I want. And that's one of the huge lessons that I have had in life. I had the brick in the face moment as opposed to the listen to the whispers moment, but it set me on a path, one that has transformed how I live my life, and one that I eagerly share with other people now as well.
I wrote down when you were talking, about the work that you do now and helping people get over the fear of public speaking, storytelling, all of that. And I thought, interesting because it's so connected. You know, when you're deeply trusting yourself or learning the skill of deeply trusting yourself, it takes courage, right? There's like steps and processes to that of like trusting the whisper, trusting the inner knowing, and then having the courage to act on it. And I can see how I think we can all resonate with having those personal moments where you're like, okay, not this. This relationship is not serving me. It's not in alignment. I know a lot of the women that I attract, you know, they're feeling it on the outside, like physical symptoms. I'm like, your body is getting sick. Your life is showing you that this isn't healthy. You know deep down what you need to do. And the next step is to have the courage. So I'm curious if you see a correlation in your work of how you had to show up in your personal life during that process and what you witness in the people that you work with when they're about to get on stage.
Totally. So, one thing I would like to say here that I see a lot, and quite honestly, it's been a journey for me to get to it myself, is how you can show up for yourself and then for others with authenticity. And authenticity, it's actually really hard. It is really, really hard because, especially when you're confronted with speaking in front of other people, for example, because it's suddenly who you are is masked by fear in many respects. So I think that's why it's interesting the work that I do now, because all of our fears do come to the surface in those respects, as well as our defense mechanisms. Like, what character do we adopt to not show the true us, and often the more vulnerable us that we don't want other people to see out of that fear? So that definitely comes up a lot. And it's something that I probably had to heal in myself to be able to help people in an effective way now. So
Yeah.
if I look back, I'm really grateful for those difficult moments because they taught me what I needed to learn and now help me share that wisdom with other people as well.
Yeah. I I find it so fascinating that when we're really open to the journey of life, um, and you're in a lesson. Like, you're in it, you can feel it, and you're like, "Oh my god, another fucking growth opportunity. Like, here we go." But that in itself, when you're talking about authenticity and becoming and leading and role modeling, um, like, I know in my personal journey that has greatly supported me in leading my children, and as they've gotten older, and the challenges professionally as well, or in my marriage, or just life in general. Um, you talked about a mask or like a character that people put on, like that fear.
Mhm.
How do you practically, and I hate when people are like, what's the tips? What's the tricks? But how do you practically teach people to let that go? Like,
Mm.
fear is such a primal instinct, and people begin to you know, they put on the front, they put on the mask. You can tell when someone is scared. So how do you allow them to get over that or move through it when they're in it?
So, something you said earlier, or we both said earlier, was about listening to the whispers. And on that, what are we actually listening to? And how are we listening? The signals that we need to listen to will come through our body, not only through our mind. Our mind is full of chatter, and sometimes that can lead us down the wrong path or encourage us to believe things even about ourselves that aren't true. But there's something about your body that doesn't lie. And what I suggest in a very, very simple idea is slow down. I see it when I'm going and speaking on stage, when anyone is, in fact, or when you're in a high stakes situation, our nervous system will put us into a state of high alert. I spoke earlier about a survival state, our fight, flight, freeze mode. And that will typically be activated in moments that we perceive to be stressful. Now, that, of course, differs depending on the individual. But the one thing that can really help you to get into a greater state of calm and to then show up more authentically without this mask is to do something to slow down your body first. So my go-to, and I will do this before I get on stage, before I did this interview or I'm doing this interview with you, it's a physiological sigh. I'll explain for anyone who doesn't know, it is scientifically proven to be the quickest way to reduce stress and anxiety in your body in real time. And what you have to do is you have to do 2 double inhales through your nose and slowly exhale. And really exhale as slowly as possible, feeling your feet firmly rooted on the ground. And so if I just demonstrate quickly, it would be and keep going from there. And you can do that 3 times and you will feel a shift in your energy. Biggest tip, easiest tip, I would say.
I mean, I did half of it with you, and I'm like, already it is wild how our breath brings us, like, home to ourselves. Mindfulness was the first. I say mindfulness, but whether it's meditation or breath work or anything, but being mindful and getting out of my head and back into my body was the first tool that was kind of on my journey. Um, and it's with us all the time. We just have to show up and utilize it. Like our bodies are designed to keep us safe. Our bodies are also designed to regulate themselves and heal, but we need
Exactly.
to sometimes consciously do that.
Yeah.
Where let's talk about speaking and storytelling in general. I've been curious about this. How books are not slowing down. People are still writing books. People still have the desire to speak. I mean, podcasting itself has become so popular. Do you know? I'm curious your perspective on like this primal instinct to be heard or seen. And yet there's so much fear around it. But I'm curious what you have found on your journey.
Yeah. So you're exactly right. I mean, storytelling, it is part of us as our wiring as human beings. And we have been telling stories for thousands of years. I mean, this is how we passed on knowledge and information in our societies. If we go back to like evolutionary times, we would sit around a campfire and we'd have those verbal anecdotes before we are writing things down. Or even when we did start writing things down, it would often be in this story form. I think it's been in modern society and really this knowledge based or information based economy that has driven us more towards the facts and figures, in which we lose that part of ourselves where we do authentically share our story. Now, one of the reasons why it's so important is because it is the fastest route to connection. You know this because you decide to open your podcast with a story. And people listening, perhaps, whether they know that cognitively or just intuitively, you connect more when somebody talking doesn't sound like an encyclopedia or a Wikipedia page, right? It's like, what is it? There's something deeper here. And it's the storytelling which will allow us to resonate, to truly resonate both with ourselves and with like minded people, others that
Mhm.
we connect with. So the link here really between this connection and this desire to be seen, to be heard, it's very human, and it's a pathway to love which we are all seeking.
Mm,
Now, in that, I think what I've witnessed as a coach in this space is that there are some people who were growing up, they were not considered, or they were not, whether they were outshone by siblings, whether they had parents that were too busy working, whether they had parents that didn't have a certain emotional intelligence that could really be there to meet their emotional, social needs. That can often manifest in that early child, this extra desire, let's say, but more of a fear-led desire to be heard, to be seen. And it will be the people who really do feel the need to take up a lot of space, actually, and to ask all the questions, to be the biggest voice in the room. And it's often insecurity driven. So, what I'd say in those instances is it's actually learning to love the part of yourself that
mm.
didn't feel considered, that didn't feel valued. And this is where I think the healing or self development aspect, as well as the skills of storytelling or speaking to use for your personal, your professional life, there's such a marriage between them two.
I have watched this in real time on multiple occasions, but one in particular, every time I'm interviewed on a podcast that is very science focused and science based, like if I'm being interviewed by a physician, they will say to me, statistically speaking, the podcast that we have where people come in and tell their story versus, riff off data, uh, do much better with downloads. And I'm like, yes, because they're being human and they're cultivating and creating a connection. And I've also witnessed this sometimes in my coaching. I will like in our group we will do storytelling workshops because I remember when I wrote my book, it was just so healing. And I feel like it's empowering as well because it takes you on a journey versus um just talking about a problem. It's like
Mhm.
you're not intellectualizing it. You have to like go through this process of storytelling. And I've also witnessed people who are very intellectual and data driven learn the skill of storytelling. I'm sure you've seen this or you work with these types of people. Professionally, when I did my TEDx talk, I watched people do this and how uncomfortable they were. And then on the other side of being able to do the keynote or like the stage talk, they're like, wow, that was personal development on steroids. So I'm curious if you notice, like when you're working with people, um, if there's a, I don't like saying secret, but if you're noticing any characteristics of the types of people who go from, I am terrified to do this versus I am on stage seamlessly embodying what is required in order to cultivate and create that connection. What is the inner characteristics that you observe from people being able to take off that mask of fear and really create that connection?
The first thing that springs to mind with that is actually environment, not the people themselves.
Mm,
Because that really can make all the difference. I mean, I it's interesting. I started my podcast, which is now called Resonate, but was called Starting Over. And this was really my story of how I overcame this adversity with a toxic relationship, I healed, grew, etc. And I would interview people also with these kinds of stories who had a really compelling hardship and they instead used that to grow as opposed to become more bitter. So I can absolutely reiterate what you were saying earlier about those episodes being the ones which people connect to more and share and save and all the things. But there are some instances where we are environments that don't really allow us to express those parts of ourselves. And you might find that you, in your context socially, for example, you're able to speak in this manner, but then in your workplace, you're working in data or engineering or very strict corporate or banking or something where this isn't naturally happening. And it's not only then you and your perception, it's how are you perceived in the group. So of course all of that comes up in terms of the fear. And I think if that isn't part of your environment, then it makes it even harder to go against the grain to share those stories of vulnerability. However, what I will say is that I can feel a huge shift in recent times. And I do think there is this, whether this is kind of the post truth era, the increase of social media, whatever it is, I think people are craving a lot more authenticity. And people are recognizing that we want to start dropping the mask. So people are daring a little bit more to share things that they otherwise wouldn't have. But I wouldn't say there is one character who per se does better or worse in this space. There are
Mhm.
some who are more open to storytelling, but I think everyone has a different vulnerability.
Mm. I feel like there's a cultural like, and this kind of circles back to the trusting the whisper and trusting your instincts. This shift to like surrender a little bit, like, the putting on the mask and trying to be perfect, all the time and checking the boxes is now just not sustainable. I mean, it wasn't before, but it's almost like people are like, I'm exhausted and I'm no longer willing to be this exhausted. I need to figure out another way. I see it daily in
Mm.
my community, and I'm like, you are all struggling and you're coming to me because I've created that connection with you and you trust me. And now we need to be more radically honest with each other. Like, I'm done. I'm done. This is where I am. So circling to, we've talked about storytelling, we've talked about all the things. Let's circle back to trusting your instincts and trusting your whispers. There's a woman listening to this episode and she's inspired about storytelling and all the things. But one thing that she's really inspired by is maybe this episode or your story is her t-shirt. Maybe
Mm.
she's like, damn it. This is my sign to really deeply trust my instincts. What do you say to her when she is listening to herself and now she has to have the courage to take the next step?
Maya Angelou, one of my favorite wise women out there, she said something of courage. And that was that courage is the most important virtue because without it, you cannot practice anything else consistently.
Mm,
What does that mean? If you think you value kindness highly, but there's a time in your life where you need to show that kindness, but it requires courage to do so because you might be speaking out against an injustice or you might be going against other people. There are times in your life where courage is going to be the ultimate thing that you need to do to get yourself where you want to go. And I think the common fear that unites us all is heading into the unknown where everything is so uncertain and you have no answers and you can't see the end point yet. You don't know exactly, you don't know all the steps. And it's frightening as hell. And in those times, to use your words, that is the surrender. That's the let go of the reins and fall into a sense of trust. And I think there are different ways that you can do that. For me, there had to be something around learning to quiet down and heal my nervous system, but that was not easy at first. I mean, quite honestly, I felt very uncomfortable being still and being quieter. And I think it was going little by little, not taking too many huge leaps because when you leap beyond your growth zone, you'll